Welcome back to another episode of Global Pulse in 60 Seconds. I'm Khazra Ahmed, and today I'm delighted to be joined by StuartMcWilliams, an accomplished leader with over 2 decades of experience across inner city, faith-based, and international educational settings. Stuart's work has consistently centered on inclusion, tackling disadvantage, and creating environments where every learner can thrive. Stuart, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you for that lovely introduction.
So you've led in remarkably diverse environments, from inner city communities to international and faith-based settings. Looking back, what core leadership principles have remained constant for you, regardless of context?
I think there's always a real value in remembering who you work for. Whilst my salary might come from a company, a school, the reality is I work for all the children in the school. And I think keeping that at the core of what you're doing in education is really important. And you can never lose sight of that. And I think it's really important that you share that with the teachers, and that every decision you make is taken with those priorities and orders. How this is going to benefit the kids? How's it going to benefit my staff? And then can we afford it? It's usually the last question that we ask in education. But having that at the core of every decision you make is, what are we going to do for our pupils? Is it going to advantage them? So that's, I guess, one of them. As you said, I worked in different settings, and I think understanding and really respecting the ethos of wherever you are. So that ability to understand the community that you're working with, understand the pupils, understand a bit of the history and the heritage, and then really embrace that with all of the planning that goes forward. So it doesn't really matter what my background is, it's where I'm working in, and can I function in that environment with success, with respecting the history, the tradition, and the ethos of the school.
Stuart, that sense of consistency speaks to leadership as a set of values rather than just strategies. I'm curious how these principles translate when the challenges are not just, academic, but deeply social and economic. And supporting disadvantaged learners has been a recurring theme in your career. How have you approached creating genuinely inclusive systems that ensure equity of access, opportunity, and outcomes for all students?
I think recognizing that there is a great deal of inequity across the world is important as a starting point. There are some out there that would deny where this inequity comes from. I think a lot of it does come from our history as human beings. It's not been the brightest of histories. Colonialism, expansionism, all those types of things have taken their toll, and they still cause problems today. So recognizing where inequities come from, and then I think working with the research that's out there, because there's lots of research out there, particularly to do with, if we look at disadvantaged pupils in the state system in the UK, then we can go to the Sutton Trust for advice, information, research. You can go to the Education Endowment Foundation, and there are clear sets of research that you can call upon, but also clear, impactful strategies that you can put into place. Some of that is accessing funding and how you use that. Some of that is measuring things like introducing a tuition program for the year 11s that are about to sit their GCSEs. How much of an impact can you expect that to have? So things like that, I think, are really useful. But stage one is always identifying what is the inequity before you then research, before you then apply whatever strategy it is you're going to be. But I think all of the things that drive that, if you go back to the original question that you asked me before, is it's that remembering you're working for those children, and what works in school will work for a large majority of children. And it's then how much time and effort and money can you focus on those that need that little boost to make it an equitable system. For exam systems, we have readers, we have scribes, we have access arrangements that can be made. So there are systemic approaches which are quite effective. But then you're looking at those that fall without the system, fall down the cracks. How do we then support them? And that's much more on a school by school basis. If you go around, you will see amazing people doing amazing things that are outside of the systems. But it is that they identify the inequity, they do some research, and then they work with the individual.
Absolutely. And it's powerful to hear inclusion framed as systemic responsibility that naturally leads us to think beyond the school gates and towards the wider role education plays in shaping young lives. So, in your view, what roles do school play in promoting, as we were talking about, wider community well-being, emotionally, socially, and culturally, say beyond the traditional measures of academic success?
I mean, I wish that education ran the world, because I think we could address so many problems if that were true. But education doesn't exist in a bubble. When you step out and to talk about the wider community, that's where all of the other facets of life come into play, and that's where it becomes complicated. I would love to sit and say that if you go to school and work hard, you'll be absolutely fine and have a great life. The reality for many of the world population is that's just not true. So there's lots of issues that would need to be addressed around education to allow for education to have the impact that it can have. We know that working hard in school and getting good grades gives future life opportunities. We know that you are better off with an education than without, but does it guarantee a success? No, it doesn't. So I think if we could take education and make it more global, make it more respected globally, and by that I mean addressing some of the inequalities that exist, where it's not what qualifications you have, it's what qualifications you have and what passport you might have that goes along with it. So those are issues that are global, that education alone can't address. We can recognize it, we can support it, we can challenge it, but we can't really address wider societal problems. Here in the UK, it's a well-established educational system that's been in place for over 100 years, and we look to try and create avenues of social mobility. The current government has put VAT fees onto independent schools as a way of trying to address inequity and raise funds that will impact then the state system. But the reality is that's not a system that's going to work. It's going to be challenging the housing crisis that goes around successful schools, state schools. That would have more of an impact, and would again allow education to really take control and build up the individuals that are going to go out to work. I think I do subscribe to the adage that it takes a village to raise a child. And even though our villages might exist now in cities, towns, we still need to make sure that the adults around are doing a good job. But we have to recognize the kids inside the school are going to be the adults of the future. So we need to work all as that community, working to develop not just the education, but the social skills. So, for example, my current school is a Waldorf school. It's very community-based. It's very ethical, ecological, natural, strong connections with the rhythms of life and nature and the cycles. And I think we need to look at bringing more of that back into our schools, because it's what we've lost. A lot of that contact with each other and contact with the world, we've transferred that onto more of a digital platform, which in my view is very much a second best. So I think transferring what we do in schools to make it more about the interconnectedness of the humanity, I think will make a big impact on society. But there are so many different facets that education can't control. So I think whilst I love education, and I think it does have the power for so much good, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, and we need to acknowledge the surrounds as well, unfortunately. Because if we did control it, if educationalists ran the world, it would be a brilliant place.
Brilliantly said, Stuart. When schools act as anchors for their communities, their influence can be transformative, and you're making a huge difference. And that raises an important question about how this impact can be amplified. And we are talking about, globally, you gave some examples. So from a global perspective, how can education systems contribute to long-term well-being, particularly in addressing inequality? I know you talked a bit about that, social mobility, and say the very foundations of healthier societies.
I think I'll go back to what I said before. There has to be that, I think, educational bodies, so all of the exam boards that exist and the teachers that go out and deliver the content and inspire the children to learn and achieve, I think there is an understanding there that we are all on the same journey and we all view each other with great respect. I don't think that's universally transferred. And I think that's one of the challenges in amplifying that global opportunity is the limitations that local governments, cultures may have, the thought patterns towards the other that may be coming in to deliver subjects. So trying to create that parity where it is universally recognized is really important. I know I said that before, but I think that is one of the greatest limiting factors in making education globally effective, is that it's not always respected in the same way from those on the outside. But I do think that teachers and educators on the inside of the system have nothing but respect and hold each other in high esteem. So I'm not really sure I answered your question there. I went off on a little tangent.
No, it's absolutely fine. Stuart, that global lens truly highlights the interconnectedness of actually education, well-being, and opportunity. And this neatly ties to our 60-second challenge, keeping to the theme of the podcast. If you had 1 minute to speak to global leaders, say policymakers, educators worldwide, what is the single most important action they should take to harness education as a driver of global well-being and a more equitable future?
I think what I would say is that they would need to trust educators to build education. Where education becomes politicized, education becomes diluted, it becomes more of a political ideology rather than a positive impact for good, which is what I think education should be. So I think stepping away from securing votes in a political sense, it needs to be handed to educationalists to develop education and do all the power of good that it can do. And part of that is going to be meeting people where they are at their current point of development and taking them to the next stage that they require in order to allow themselves to build successful lives, have good families, have good health, and then build from there. Because at the moment, not everyone needs GCSEs and A-levels. Some people don't need that education. Some people need the education about how to farm properly, how to irrigate. And those types of education, I think, perhaps not as valued and measured, can have a huge impact. So I think if you trusted educationists to develop a global program, we would do it very successfully without the influence of politicians and those who are trying to secure votes for their next term.
I agree with that 100%, Stuart. And you know my thoughts on that. And that's a very compelling call to action and a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and for all the work you continue to do in shaping education as a force of global good, I would say. It was a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Kaja.